when you're holding to some standard that's outside yourself, that is inherently inauthentic. Because if it's somebody saying you need to be this way to be good, to be valuable, and you don't feel good or valuable being that way, nobody's going to be the perfect teacher. Nobody's going to be the perfect landscaper, whatever, nobody's going to be perfect. Hello and welcome to Divergent Paths. I'm your host, Dr. Regina McMenemy. I am a doctor, but not that kind of doctor, and this is a podcast, not medical advice. Divergent Paths is a podcast where we explore the unique experiences and perspectives of neurodivergent individuals. Our Everything You Need to Know About series will take a deep dive into some of the common characteristics neurospicy individuals experience. Joining me for this series is my longtime friend and host of the Business DIY podcast, Russ. In this episode, we are diving into a topic that resonates deeply for many in the neurodivergent community: perfectionism. We'll explore how perfectionism manifests, how it is often a coping mechanism and a challenge, and some strategies we can use to navigate it. As always, I'll share some of my personal experiences, and we'll unpack ways to embrace imperfection as part of the journey. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening to Divergent Paths.
My mom would sometimes say, "Oh, you're so perfect."
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom would say that to me as a kid. And I just...
That she set a standard for you that was so high.
Was it a standard for me or was it not? Because I mean, if you looked at my report card, it probably felt like it wasn't. Rough years in middle school. But I don't know. I mean, I did another podcast about perfectionism a few years back.
Yeah.
And it felt a little like therapy. So I think talking about it today is also
It's going to help too.
Feel a little like that, because it's something I don't know if it really chases me or if it's something that I'm just hyper aware of and concerned about because I don't want to make that an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, for me, I feel like I'm hyper aware of it too. Once I became aware of it and my tendencies toward it, I became very careful about about the standards I held myself to. Because,
well, it's like with my kids too, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure with your daughter, it's like you don't want to say that. You don't want to go there because it makes these unrealistic expectations.
Right.
And you don't want to make somebody where they're going to have to chase perfectionism.
Right. Chase or hold themselves to an unrealistic standard. Like, that's really
right.
If we're going to come to a definition, which we probably should as we start the episode.
Exactly. Right.
Perfectionism is holding an unrealistic standard. Nothing human made is ever going to be perfect. Nothing you make, nothing I make, nothing our kids make, nothing is perfect, because nothing holds to a standard of flawlessness, because that's what perfectionism is.
So in the context of being neurodivergent, why do you think it shows up so often and so strongly in some people?
I think there's a couple of root causes for it with neurodivergence. I think the first one is when you feel different all the time and you don't know why you feel different all the time, you strive to fit in. So it kind of links to masking a little bit, in that if I can be perfect, I will fit in, right? Like, if you're trying to get into that mentality of I'm on the outside and I want to be on the inside, then that is like one, I think, trying to be perfect, trying to hold high standards, all of that comes to, setting this perfectionist goal. And so I think that that's one part of it. I think that a lot of people who are neurodivergent are also highly intelligent, which is something we haven't really talked about in our interviews, or in our Everything You Want to Know About topic episodes, that intelligence sets you to a point where you often feel like you're really capable and you can do a lot. So the combination of feeling like you don't really fit in, but you're capable and competent and can do a lot, I think very much is just like a super highway to I can be perfect.
Mm. Right.
And I think it's hard. It's hard to pull away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so with that, you sort of have me thinking about, and I want to get your take on perfectionism versus confidence versus just healthy confidence in being able to do something. Like, where's the line there in your mind?
For me, with my experience, when my perfectionism gets activated, it's not it's in response often to not feeling confident.
Mm,
So when I feel confident and I feel secure in something, I don't have to make it perfect.
right.
When
That makes total sense.
right? When I'm
Yeah.
insecure and I'm uncertain what I'm doing, I have this guiding principle that I need to stay in whatever lines I'm supposed to be in and do whatever I'm supposed to do exactly as I need to be doing it because I'm uncertain of my footing. So, like, I'll use writing as an example. I I I would definitely call myself an expert writer at this point, right? Like, more years
Oh
experience
yeah.
writing than
Oh yeah.
than pretty much anything else. Words are my first love. Writing is the thing that I love to do the most. And I used to have this exceptionally high standard for myself. Like, about the time I got into grad school, when I felt like my writing was really peaking, I knew in my undergrad my writing was still kind of growing. And like I finished my senior project, my capstone project for my bachelor's degree. And one of the instructor for the class went and circled like how I use the same sentence structure like in every sentence on an entire page. And she's just like, you just have to get in the habit of breaking this up a little bit. And it was a real moment for me of I had just gotten stuck in a loop, which is a very kind of autistic thing to do, honestly. I got kind of stuck in this loop for, this sentence worked and it was a correct, thing. And I just did it over and over and over again. So she opened my eyes to like, okay, like crafting a little bit more. But at the same time, then that crafting got me thinking about, okay, I have to make sure that all of the sentences that that there's difference, that there's this, that there's, variability, that. So I got a little better, but I also got a little closer to, oh, it needs to be this way if it's going to be perfect, right? And so by the time I got to grad school, my standards were so high, it was almost impossible for me to finish some of my assignments. Like
Mm.
almost impossible for me to finish some of my writing. And I had to really step myself back from that and go, it needs to be good enough. Like you need to stop at good enough. And then I started to reframe, particularly with writing, it being good enough instead of perfect.
So I feel like we've talked a little about like not completing a project,
Right.
with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
You get to a certain point and you stop. Is it the
Right.
perfectionism that's stopping
Sometimes.
you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be. I mean, I don't know if it always is. It depends. Sometimes it's just the dopamine runs out of something and,
Right. It's
you
just
know,
no longer exciting. It's
yeah.
it's it's the
Yeah. It
yeah.
doesn't hold the draw it did. Like
Right.
sometimes there's that like, oh, this is so exciting, this is new, this is novel, etc. That keeps you kind of like
Right.
moving.
Right.
And if that,
So
yeah.
and um okay, so I'll ask this one with and tell a little story here of so I when I worked in radio, I worked with Ryan Seacrest for a
Hmm.
while.
I remember.
And he was such a dedicated person to what he was doing and the craft. And I would say there was definitely, this like he had to get the edits like perfect to a call
Mm-hmm.
that, and I'm stressing out because this call is going to run next. We need to push play. We need to stop playing around and editing this call because I need to push play on it in like 10 seconds. And you're like editing
You're
out
still
this
fussing
little
with it. Right.
in the
Right.
middle.
Right.
Right. And it would always like stress me out.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I don't know if it was perfectionism for him. I think it was just this just drive to like want to get to the next level of and level himself up.
Mm-hmm.
And but I mean, maybe it was. I don't know. I mean, I'm no doctor.
Well, it's
Um,
it sounds like there's like you're talking about like a little bit of ambition kind of mixed in there too.
well, and that's where now I'm getting into that. It's like so we're saying confidence versus perfectionism. What about
Mm-hmm.
ambition versus perfectionism?
Well, I mean, there are plenty of imperfect people who are ambitious.
Totally.
So I don't know. Um, like I don't think maybe that's part of the crux here is there's a difference between wanting to be better and getting stuck or stymied in needing to be perfect. And
Hmm.
and this story about Ryan Seacrest feels like a stymie. It doesn't feel like he's really getting better because like the listeners aren't going to care about that he's cutting out 10 seconds before the call needs to go live. Like
Right.
nobody is listening to that way but him. Even you,
Right.
right? As,
Right.
the tech, who's sitting there
Yeah.
working with him. You're not listening to it to that degree either. And what's bad
Right.
about that too is, from a sound perspective and from a human perspective, is that those stumbles and those fillers are important to the authenticity of what's being presented, right?
Right. Like
So,
I'm gonna leave in that mistake right there that you
right,
just made.
right, because those make it real, and so
Exactly.
trying to
Yeah.
it's kind of ridiculous to even sit here like we know our media is edited, and now that we have you know video sharing platforms and other things where people will stop and you will see the cuts in the videos, right? You
Yeah.
will see
Drives
the
me crazy.
jumps,
I hate that.
right? You will see it. You know that they
Yeah.
cut something and to
Right.
make whatever they are saying, more cohesive. Which, as someone who's coughing because I'm coming over, being sick in this episode, so we've had a delay of episodes because I have not been able to speak or record.
Right.
Right. But I stop. Like I want to hold my consistent standard with putting the podcast out, right? But it would have
Right.
been detrimental to me. It would have been frustrating for you as my editor to try to go through and edit a show that I had been coughing or sneezing or, wheezing, literally wheezing through. Right. And I'm
Right.
still coming
Right.
out of it. I'm still not quite there, but I'm definitely better than I was. But see, that's it. Like I'm better than I was. Right. And I didn't push myself to meet my publication standard above my health. Right.
Right.
And and there's something authentic in that too. Like, like that's part of what I have to learn as someone who is neurodivergent, who's launching a new consulting business, who is trying to do all of these things that are 100% out of my wheelhouse, that are huge value to me, that I feel, a good portion of my identity is wrapped up in. And I have to step back and say, you can do good, you can do a good job, you can set a standard for yourself that works and not drive yourself into the ground, because nobody is going to appreciate you when you've pushed yourself into the ground that far. Nobody, like I
Right.
said, like on the call, nobody was listening to Ryan Seacrest going, oh my God, did you hear that call? There was not a single in that call. Nobody
Right.
cared.
Right. Right. Yeah, he was just chasing after this. I want this crisp sound, perfect throughout the show. Like that's what I felt like
And
that was the chase because I think it
that's
was
the
just he
sickness.
was always concerned like,
Hmm.
is this the one that Simon Cowell's listening to?
Right.
Or whatever.
Right, whatever it is going to take him to
Yeah.
where he's
Yeah.
going, and
Hmm.
that's it. But like people aren't crisp and people aren't clean, And
Yeah.
people don't speak that way, like I was watching some show and I was like, oh, it's so nice sometimes that like people on TV shows, like scripted TV shows, they sound so good because nobody talks like this in real life.
Right. Oh, I know. That's one of the frustrating things with like the Gilmore Girls, right? How
Yes.
fast they talk and how
Yes.
quick-witted they are. It's like,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah.
Nobody can do that in real life.
Nobody gets
You
clips
can't.
like this, quite that,
Exactly. Not
Yeah.
happening. I
Nope.
was doing improv last night and somebody broke on stage and they're just laughing. And I just
Mhm.
went with it because it was hilarious. Like
Yeah.
everybody thought it was funny that
Right.
they broke.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Yeah. And
we will
that's,
play that along with that.
I had a story like that.
Yeah.
There was my high school play when I was a sophomore in high school, and one of the characters' mustaches was falling off through the whole episode, or not the whole episode, through
Nice.
the whole show, just slowly like sinking. And he's like trying to push it up with his lip and like, trying not to make it obvious
Mhm.
that, he's struggling with this. And finally it was like the last scene and it's literally like hanging off his mouth. And I just started laughing and then everybody else started laughing. And then the whole audience started laughing. And it is like
Right.
one of my favorite stories of high school is about
Mhm.
me blowing it, like
Right. Yeah,
blowing it
totally.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like the
It's
best thing.
fun.
It is.
It makes
Exactly.
it
It is
makes for a
fun.
good story.
It
Yeah.
makes for a good
Yeah.
story. Yep.
Totally. Okay, so I feel like and you give me some questions, some leads on this, and I
Right.
never go for them exactly. But I
Right.
feel like we've gone through question one at this
Right.
point
Right.
because I wanted to get a definition of perfectionism. Really, you got
Right.
to look at. I wanted to look at like let's look
Mhm.
at some of the things that it compares to.
Right.
Um, one of the things that and now I'm going to totally throw it off again, but one of the other things that this makes me think of is when you were talking in a previous episode about masking,
Right.
and it feels like this
Mhm.
sort of blends with that a little bit, like perfectionism can like be a way of masking.
Yeah, it can, if you feel like you're doing things wrong all the time, striving to do things perfectly is is a part of the masking. Like if I can just be perfect and then people can just see that I can do XYZ perfectly. Like you think about maybe dance, right? If
Mhm.
you're involved in dance and it's like, "Oh, I can get all of the moves exactly right," then everybody will know that I am, perfect and so good at this. And then if you don't do that and you beat yourself up at the end of it, then you kind of get into this like really bad cycle of like, I have to be perfect to be valuable, right? And so that's part of, I think, for me, I think that was a big part of my masking was wanting that sense of being I don't want to say perfect person because I never felt like a perfect person, but being able to present myself in like the absolute best light I could. And in order to do that, I did a lot of people pleasing where I was saying yes to things that weren't in alignment with what I wanted to do or with who I was because other people wanted me to do them and to be that way.
Right.
And I think that when you're holding to some standard that's outside yourself, that is inherently inauthentic. Like unless
Right.
it's, because if it's somebody saying you need to be this way to be good, to be valuable, and you don't feel good or valuable being that way, and those things are misaligned, then it is. And so nobody's going to be the perfect teacher. Nobody's going to be the perfect landscaper, whatever, you know,
Right.
nobody's going to be perfect. So trying to hold yourself to that, I think, ends up kind of, making the mask even unfortunately, more powerful because you're trying to hold to a standard that just doesn't exist.
And then as with masking, it seems like there's draining feelings there,
Mm,
right? You're
yes.
feeling drained because
Hmm.
of having to do all this and
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
play this
mean,
role
exactly.
instead of
Like,
being
yeah. Like if you feel like you need to be perfect in order to be on stage or you need to be like I love to sing, but I don't It is not something that I have a whole lot of experience with. I have some experience with it. And I was taking, voice lessons for a while, and I had to drop off because I just had too much other stuff going on in my life. But I had one recital with my new teacher. And when I did a little, speech before my song, because I knew I was going to mess up one part. Like, I had not managed in my rehearsing to get it the way I wanted it to be and the way I wanted it to sound. And I knew I was going to mess up, and I was really uncomfortable going up to sing in front of a bunch of people knowing I was going to mess this up.
Right.
So I said, and I gave a little speech at the beginning. I said, one of the things I love the most about my voice teacher is anytime I made a mistake during rehearsal, she would cheer. She didn't admonish me. She didn't tell me I was doing bad. She didn't laugh. I don't know, whatever, all the awful things that somebody could do. She cheered because she believed mistakes were valuable, right? And
Right.
that was a profoundly different way to think about this. Because for me, I had always thought you don't want to make mistakes. You want to be perfect. So I told that story. I said, because it was all students of hers. And I said, you all know how this goes. You make a mistake and she cheers for you, right? And everybody starts nodding and clapping and laughing about it because they've all had the same experience with her because she's their teacher. And I said, this has been a really good process for me to break down some of my expectations about myself because I have always held myself to a standard that I can't reach. So I said, all right, let's sing and let's make some mistakes. And then when I blew the part I knew I was going to blow, I didn't care.
Right.
Right.
Right. I mean, I feel like in that story, in my story about improv, it's almost like, I don't know, the imperfections are more interesting.
They are. They are. Yeah.
Right.
Like you look at a piece of a piece of furniture that is cut from just a piece of wood and you see the knots in it, right? Those are
Right.
imperfections in the wood, right? But they're the things that make the wood beautiful. They're the things that
Right.
make that piece of wood unique, right?
Right. Right.
Why would we not want to? I have to insert just a small story here about my small human. So last night was her school's winter performance. So they all put a show together, and the littles do a little choir thing where they sing. And this year they did a little dance, and it was adorable. And my daughter's grade levels, they produce their own show. So they write and produce and
Nice.
create this thing. It's great. So she was getting ready and she's like, I'm going to wear some makeup. And I'm like, valid. Like, you want to have some makeup on when you're on stage and stuff. And so she went in, she was doing her makeup. And now when she was four or five, she got a cut on her eyebrow and she has a scar. And it's not very big, but it does cut through the hair on her eyebrow, and you can her hair parts around it on her eyebrow. She comes out and she's like, I put some concealer on my scar so it would show up better on stage. And
Right.
that, to me, that's it's reassuring to me that's she is accepting that this not just is part of how her face looks, because she was young enough that I could have done some creams and stuff to try to get it to not heal
Right.
with the scar. I could have tried to kind of cut it, but I didn't or whatever. But she has this little scar, and I could feel guilt because here's my perfect child.
Right.
I'm never called perfect in her life because I'm not setting that standard for her.
Yeah.
Who sees this imperfection and wants to make sure other people see her imperfection. And yay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this all takes me to When Harry Met Sally. I don't know why I blanked on that movie, but the end of it, right?
Right.
Like, I love that you get cold when it's 71
Right.
degrees out. I love that little crinkle in your nose when you
You're looking
look at
at
me
me
like
like,
I'm crazy.
right.
Like,
Yeah.
all of the, like, and the song that goes
Right.
along with that movie,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
"Love you despite all your faults," or whatever like
Right.
that,
Yeah.
or it's just like, I don't know. I I guess, I mean, like, I started with like, oh, I've always been, aware of the whole perfectionism thing and not wanting to chase that because I heard that early in life, and
Right.
I don't want to say that to people or do that to people because
Mhm.
I just feel like that's, you know, not a not a good standard to hold anyone to,
Right.
whether it's a
Exactly.
relationship or it's a,
Mhm.
child or whatever. My cat is definitely not perfect. Um so to some, right? Like,
Mhm.
when you hear perfectionism, it could sound like a good thing, right? Like, oh, I'm striving to be perfect. What do you say to that?
Um, I say perfectionism is a lot more limiting than you might think it is. Um, you know, I talked a little bit about like the importance of a growth mindset, and striving to be perfect is not a growth mindset. It is a fixed mindset. It is where you are trying to be something finished. And the truth is, or the truth should be, that we're never finished.
Mhm.
And I think it was um, Da Vinci who had a quote that was, "No piece of art is ever finished, only abandoned."
Mm.
And I think that falls with this. Like now, here we have Da Vinci, who are still talking about, hundreds of years later, as being one of the amazing thinkers of the world, and who was probably neurodivergent, by the way. Um, you know, uh, as this, and he kind of, in some ways, that embraces this idea, like, you don't necessarily finish, and none of us should finish, and we really shouldn't put pressure on ourselves. For me, that's what perfectionism always says. That idea of needing to be perfect is a pressure that I have put on myself my whole life to attain a goal that is unattainable. And instead, accepting who I am and the divergent path I'm on, the journey of growth that I'm experiencing now that I accept more of who I am, is a much more powerful thing than I ever could have been had I ever achieved perfection.
How and I won't say how did you, because I think I mean, that's always that's a tough one. I don't know if you could say you've totally walked away from it, but
Not at
how do
all.
you start to break free from that? How do you, when you see it happen, how do you recognize it and make a change?
That's a really good question, a really hard question, because I will tell you that even in the last few days, I have caught myself in this like perfectionist and mindset of, oh, I blew that. Like the whole thing is ruined because I blew this one thing, or I messed up one thing, or I had one misstep. And then this whole thing that I was really looking forward to is going to come crashing down around me because I made one misstep. So it is not something that I would ever say again, like perfectionism. I'm not past it. I'm, like, the goal, like the end. I am not past it. It is still very much part and parcel of my journey. But I have an understanding now that allows me a level of self empathy that I didn't have before. And I don't really know how to tell someone to get to that other than to start surrounding yourself with people who treat you with that kind of empathy. Because once people start treating you with that kind of empathy, it's a lot easier for you to treat yourself that way.
Very nice.
Thank you.
I like
Thank
that
you.
advice.
I think that was good advice. If you want more advice like that, please seek me out as an ADHD
Exactly.
coach.
Well, that's one of the things though. We actually, we don't
We don't
plug
talk enough
your
about.
consulting, which which is sort of the point of this,
And that is part of
right?
the
I mean,
reason why we
I mean,
launched this in the first place. No, I mean, the
I hate to say
conversations.
it's the point because
Right.
really it's
That's true.
like, I mean, people are getting so much benefit from just hearing
Yes.
you share your story
Yeah.
and, hearing me tell some crazy, like, little
Well,
weird
and you
side
asked the
story every
questions
once in a
like,
while.
Right. Tell the side stories. But you ask the questions in a way that lets me have that empathetic response to myself. Like, that's one of the best things about this partnership, is that you are approaching these conversations with the kind of curiosity that is a growth mindset, because you are learning about this as I have learned about it, and so there's kind of the synchronicity in it. But this is exactly what my coaching practice and my consulting practice is going to be. I want to lead with curiosity. I want to lead the people I coach and the people I consult with and the businesses I consult with that growth mindset, to get them past this black and white, either you follow the way that we do things or you fail mindset, because that doesn't help anybody's business. That doesn't help anybody's life.
Yeah. And, coming at this too, I mean, the other podcast I host is a business podcast, right? And so I'm talking to business owners and hearing and, living that life and being a consultant of businesses for years and years and years, and talking to all these business owners. This is needed. When you originally told me about this whole thing, I was like, this is great, because I can see it coming into play in so many different areas of a business. Like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
so it's great that you're doing this.
It's coming directly out of my experience with having entered a workplace that was so unbelievably toxic to my disability, to my ADHD, to my neurodivergence, that I completely shut down in it, and I had to quit. And all of this whole, I had the idea for the podcast before that job happened, but the business came after, because I was like, I shouldn't have been subjected to this. Nobody should be subjected to this. And it shouldn't be, we enter a workplace and they don't know how to accommodate someone who is an adult with neurodivergence. That shouldn't be how it is. We shouldn't be able to accommodate our children in the classrooms. And I'm not saying classroom accommodations are perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot more structure in place for supporting people with neurodivergence when they're younger, and not as much in the workplace and as we get older. And I think it really is important to start to have conversations around, how do we grow this?
If somebody wanted to, now it's like I'm interviewing a guest here, but this is your podcast. But if somebody wanted to actually, get your services, like actually bring you into their business, how do they do so?
Yeah, you can go and book a discovery session with me on my website, divergentpathsconsulting.com, which is in all the show notes for the podcast, and you can search for book that. Both businesses and individuals that are looking for neurodivergent support and workshops or individual coaching, just book a discovery session and we can talk and see what kind of path we can set out. That's a wrap on this episode of Divergent Paths, where we explored the intricate dance between neurodivergence and perfectionism, how it can feel like it will inspire us to achieve great things, but often holds us back when the pursuit of perfect becomes overwhelming. If this episode sparks some insights, or if you've got your own experiences with perfectionism to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Blue Sky at Divergent Paths Consulting. Let's support each other in embracing progress over perfection. Thank you for tuning in and for being part of this journey. Remember, you're enough just as you are, and authenticity is the goal. Until next time, keep striving, keep growing, and embrace your divergent path.